Hey everybody. So this week we're going to talk about the new Hellboy movie and why it sucks. Well, we're not going to talk about why it sucks. We're just going to kind of talk about why it doesn't work, why it isn't making a ton of money, and where everything went wrong. Before we get into it, I should state that I did see Hellboy and I reviewed it. My actual printed review is in the description below. And it's like fine. It's not a really bad movie, but I wouldn't consider it a very good one. I take that back. It is kind of a bad movie. There's already been two successful Hellboy films in 2004 and 2008 respectively, and I guess 4 films if you count the 2 animated straight-to-video home releases that they also made. And those movies were all, either directed by or it's intentionally related to Oscar winner Guillermo Del Toro. And he's obviously a huge lifelong fan of Mike Mignola's comic books and worked with Mignola very closely on the adaptations. And those movies are mostly well-beloved. They're mostly pretty good. I revisited them recently and have some feelings to share about them later in the video. But those movies were pretty successful. People liked them. They did well. They were well cast. And then there was just nothing for years, just no Hellboy anything. And then we got this one, this weird R-rated reboot starring David Harbour from Stranger Things, directed by Neil Marshall, the guy that directed The Descent. And it just... I remember when it was announced, it seemed like it could be kind of cool. It was okay, if you can't get Guillermo Del Toro back to make Hellboy for whatever reason, and you can't get Ron Perlman to put the makeup on again, David Harbour's not bad casting, and Neil Marshall's a pretty decent director. This could be a fun movie, and it's rated R. Maybe that'll give it a new dimension or something to make it different, something to make it more palatable. Maybe it'll help Hellboy fit with a new audience that has no, fond memories of the other films. 15 years has passed, so... it is fair to say that you could get away with a reboot now, right? But the movie, isn't very good. It didn't make very much money this weekend, which means it's not going to make much money anywhere else. And people just don't fully understand, how it happened or why it happened. So I kind of wanted to break down, all this stuff. First, we have to get into why there isn't a third Guillermo Del Toro directed Hellboy movie. Guillermo Del Toro has gone on to be a much bigger name in Hollywood than he was when he made these films. He's got an Oscar now, and he has sort of a recognizable brand. You would think that maybe some studio would want to cash in on making another Hellboy movie with Guillermo Del Toro at the helm. But apparently, that's not the case. And there's actually somewhat sound financial reasoning for this. Do you see, the first Hellboy movie had a production budget of roughly $60 million, and it made close to 100. And then Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, made a roughly $150 million off of an $80 million budget. So if you look at it just on basic paper, it's look, each movie had a modest budget for a blockbuster at the time, and then it made its budget back and then some. That's good, that's modest. And each time the growth was exponential, so the assumption would be that a Hellboy 3 that Guillermo del Toro had already planned out would be even bigger and would make even more money. They were actually, making some growth, right? Capitalists love that shit. The problem is, though, that doesn't factor in all the marketing costs for both films, and once you factor that in, the movies didn't make very much money theatrically. Most of the money made from Hellboy and Hellboy 2: The Golden Army came from home video releasing and DVD sales and things like that. So by the time it was, appropriate to start working on a Hellboy 3 movie that Guillermo del Toro had mapped out and was probably going to cost upwards of $100 million, probably between 120, 150 or whatever, the home video market, if you'll recall, this is 2010, 2011, around this time, started to implode. People started moving away from buying DVDs and things like that and using streaming services. So in the event that they did take this gamble, Lionsgate took this gamble on Hellboy 3, and it didn't perform admirably theatrically, and it was kind of a dud, they didn't have DVD sales and Blu-ray sales to fall back on if it didn't work out. So, obviously, they tried to get Guillermo del Toro to figure out, can you do a more streamlined version of this? And if you watch Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, it's very clear that Guillermo figured out how to have his cake and eat it too. And, he was not about to make a third movie where he was making a bunch of, compromises. He went pretty full GDT in that movie. Nobody fucked any fish people, but it's Die Hard, really uncut him, So of course this guy's not going to come back for a third movie that's going to be even smaller than the second movie and more scaled back. He's just not going to do it. He's going to keep pushing until they change their mind. The issue is that they didn't change their mind. They were not about to take that kind of financial risk on Guillermo del Toro's weird creature fetishism and stuff. Understandably, I suppose. So he bailed. He was fuck it, I'm not going to do it. and they tried to continue moving forward on a Hellboy 3 with a different director, but Ron Perlman wasn't going to come back in all that makeup without his buddy by his side, so they said, well, this isn't going to work. This just isn't going to happen. It's why every couple of years after Hellboy 2, we would get interviews where they would talk about it. We're truly trying to make it work, but nothing came of it. And that's just the reality of it. Hollywood, when it comes down to it, is about making money and not about making art. So, no Hellboy 3. But Mike Mignola and the rights holders for the films continued trying to figure out what to do with the character in the mainstream, right? Because, for Mike Mignola, it would benefit him to have a new Hellboy movie because it would help drive sales of the existing Hellboy comics that he's created. So, he probably clearly wants the franchise to continue. So, Mike Mignola and writer Christopher Golden and also Andrew Cosby, the creator of Eureka, the TV show, got together and developed an idea, a script for, what could be a Hellboy 3. Sort of like a soft sequel that wouldn't so explicitly follow up on the other two movies, but would have most of the same characters and just explore different elements of the Hellboy universe. It's a pretty expanded, there's tons of characters, tons of stories and stuff to draw from, so it shouldn't have been hard. I actually read the script that Andrew Cosby wrote. It's a draft from maybe 2 years ago, from before the movie went into production. And Andrew holds full writing credit for the movie. The one that was just released, even though essentially when you watch the film, it feels they feel almost like night and day. Andrew still is responsible for the core structure of the movie. If you were to take the movie Hellboy 2019 that just came out and the script this guy wrote and summarize them both without details, just basic plot elements, they would be nearly identical. In terms of just summary. If they were on index cards, not that different. But so much can change from the page to the shooting of a movie. A lot changed here. Mignola's key idea was taking this 3-book arc from late in the Hellboy publication history and turning that into one big movie, because there's enough from each of these 3 different adventures that you could kind of shove them together and make them one coherent movie. And these are really late in Hellboy's history. This is basically past the point that Mike Mignola was even drawing the books himself as much anymore. These 3 books were done by Duncan Fegredo, and the script essentially ties together Hellboy Mexico, which is Mignola and Richard Corbin working together, and then Hellboy the Wild Hunt, and then 2 other Hellboy stories, and they're mushed together to form this 4-tiered thing. It sort of makes sense why they thought this would work, right? Because they're distant enough from all the other kind of early Hellboy stuff that we already seen in the movies. They're not predicated upon the same sort of fairy tale magic, Guillermo Del Toro fantasy type stuff that he was moving in the direction of. It would kind of be its own thing that you could feasibly make with the same people. So much so that Abe Sapien is a major character in the Cosby draft that I read. He's I know in the actual movie he shows up as an Easter egg at the very end, but here he's just Abe. He's just a part of the goings on, and it's interesting. It's pretty cool. The script is not fantastic. The dialogue is a little bit iffy, and it has way too much of a reliance on flashbacks and characters just popping up and explaining complicated things about their history from years ago, instead of starting there or letting the audience figure it out. It's not great. I'm not going to get too much into the script because I already kind of bored you guys to tears with that last week with the Shazam video. However, the movie here feels like it could have been a good movie. It wasn't great, but it could have been a watchable flick, okay? What went wrong is that because Ron Perlman and all these other people wanted to come back for the movie, Millennium Films, the studio putting this new film out, distributing it, decided, well, let's try to make it more of an actual reboot. Let's just start from scratch. So they get David Harbour to be Hellboy. They get Neil Marshall direct it. They get other writers to do on-set rewrites and change things around and stuff. So Abe gets cut. And everything gets changed to be more like a brand new start for Hellboy. So much so that Hellboy is rewritten to seem more like the kind of Hellboy from earlier prequel stories in Mignola's history, right? This isn't a Hellboy who knows who he is or his past and all this stuff and is wrestling with it. This is sort of a more teenage-esque take on the character. And I know you guys love Stranger Things and people love David Harbour, and I'm a fan of the actor myself, but his take on the character is so grating.
Some dads get their kids Legos.
It's just, he makes Hellboy seem like this irritating 15-year-old, and it doesn't make him angsty or interesting or relatable. It just makes him weird. It is a weird thing to watch. And the original draft that I read had so much, regular Hellboy stuff. You could kind of picture Ron Perlman delivering this dialogue and giving it kind of that same rugged charm. But all the stuff, the way he speaks in the movie, the way he interacts with the professor, everything about it is just cringy and awkward and weird. And add to that, you have this sort of prequel-esque early year one version of Hellboy working through a bunch of adventures from later in Hellboy's career, and there's just this odd dissonance. When you're watching the movie, you're like, how is he going through all this stuff? There's all these characters and all these things that I think the average viewer, if they weren't already a Hellboy fan, wouldn't even understand. But the character himself is from the past. That's just weird, right? Like, it'd be like having prequel Anakin hanging out with like Finn and Poe and all of them. It'd be super strange. But that doesn't even get into all the other weird stuff. Like, behind the scenes and on set, there were a lot of real big issues involving the film because one of the producers and the director, Neil Marshall, didn't get along, and clearly were probably arguing about different things, and there's a lot of fighting over the tone of the film, which is why the movie looks like a tonal mess. You can't tell if it's like an action film or a horror film or a superhero movie. It's just all over the place. Not in a cool way where it feels like the genres are synthesized together into something new. It literally just feels like a mistake. If you read Hollywood trade papers and tabloids and things of that nature, you're probably already familiar with the ongoing scandals surrounding Charlotte Kirk, an actress, singer, person who has been connected to multiple different scandals involving really dumb, shithead, rich male Hollywood executive types. So she apparently was having an affair with Warner Brothers' Kevin Tsujihara, who had to step down from being a CEO recently because he's an idiot. And she's been connected to like Brett Ratner. Brett Ratner's producing partner Will Packer. Connected to Avi Lerner, the guy that runs Millennium Films that released the new Hellboy. Basically, this woman has... I can't really fault her because she lives in Hollywood, and Hollywood is run by a bunch of weird, ridiculous, rich people who are led by their penises. So, you know, I can't fault a young actress for like trying to get on and get famous by like manipulating these guys. Like, you know, kudos to her. But basically... Charlotte was supposed to be cast, or wanted to be cast, in the role of Alice in the new Hellboy film. And Lawrence Gordon, one of the film's producers, was like, no, I'm not going to put this woman in a movie just because you guys don't want to fuck her. We're not doing that. And as a result, that created this big rift with director Neil Marshall, who also loved her for the role and really wanted her in the movie, probably for purely creative reasons. That was sort of a specter hanging over the entire film's production. Neil Marshall clearly wanted to be making this movie with Charlotte Kirk, wanted her to be on set. And as a result of her not being there, it was just constant beef with the producer. His longtime cinematographer was fired from the film halfway through the film's production. They changed a bunch of things to editing. There's a lot of rewrites. Rumors that David Harbour would like walk off set if he was asked to do too many takes. Like, everything about it is the kind of like trade report that comes out 3 months before a movie just fails. There's never a movie where there's a bunch of really terrible things that talk about happening on set and that gets out and the movie comes out and it does well. Sometimes it's because all those things are indicative of a production gone awry, and also it's because once that stuff starts leaking out and people start hearing about it, it definitely affects the way they perceive the movie. You know, you're watching a movie that like falls apart, there's issues with it, you're less likely to think critically about like why it could be better or how they could have made things differently, and you're much more likely to think, oh well, everyone fucked up and they just made a mess or something. So those are like the comical sort of like tabloid reasons why the production was so haunted and such. But I think one of the key reasons the movie doesn't work is the approach. At its best, the new Hellboy movie feels kind of like an 80s Canon Films production of a Hellboy comic adaptation, okay? It's bloody, comically violent to the point that it's like weird and hard to take seriously. It's all over the place tone-wise. There's like comedy, there's like bad drama, there's like shitty horror. None of it really coalesces together, right? But that is not the worst thing in the world, okay? Like, we live in a world where, you know, there's so many more lanes for genre films than there have been in the past. Like, every other month someone's putting out something based on a comic book. So there's different opportunities and there's different ways and chances you can adapt the material to make someone in an audience like it. The problem with this Hellboy movie is it tries to be so many different things to so many different people that it misses the boat on what makes Hellboy special in the first place. Mike Mignola's comics are so unique because Hellboy comics are basically their own genre. The artist and his personal thematic preoccupations and his style and his influences all gel together to make this like one thing. And like that's what Hellboy is. It's kind of a supernatural thriller, it's kind of an action comic, it's kind of a superhero thing, it's kind of all these different stuff. But the way Mignola puts it together and like flattens it out with his art style, that's what it is. The Guillermo Del Toro films are like good, you know, they're pretty strong, but the big thing about them is they feel more like Guillermo Del Toro films than they feel like Hellboy movies. They have Hellboy in them, they have all the characters, they have a lot of the mythology, but it's rung through this the prism of the way Del Toro sees the world and what he cares about when he's making movies. It's him taking the things of Hellboy that he likes, making them his own, and then sharing it with you, which is great. That's totally awesome. The first Hellboy movie, I think, as much as it is a compromise with like the weird white dude fuel agent who has to be the audience like surrogate and stuff, the second film, Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, is like all Del Toro. Everything about that movie, all this sort of weird, hardcore mixture of like comedy and horror, the mixture of like childlike innocence with like ferocious sort of genre stuff, like everything about that movie is like pure GDT. But I mean, it doesn't feel like Hellboy anymore, you know what I mean? Essentially, what Guillermo Del Toro sees Hellboy as being is like steampunk Men in Black. It's just a bunch of characters with like weirdly archaic, toyetic gadgets hunting ghosts and stuff. It's like Ghostbusters, but for like fucking weirdos. And those movies are good, and they have a lot of interesting things to say about Del Toro's obsessions with like creatures and monsters and outcasts. You know, watching Hellboy 2 over, the one thing I kept thinking was that Guillermo Del Toro, if anything else, should probably make an X-Men movie at some point in his career. Like, he just sort of gets how to frame outsiders in a way that's really understandable and relatable. I mean, one of the key moments in Hellboy 2 is like a forest god getting its head blown out, and that's like the saddest thing in the whole movie, you know? They're so far removed from what you would expect a mainstream adaptation of a superhero, you know, horror comic to be. The truth is, Hellboy, if you were going to make it a successful feature, if you wanted to really translate what makes the comic work to the movies, is you'd have to make it much more matter-of-fact. It wouldn't have to be so stylized. You would just have to create a world that resembles the world that Mignola has drawn in his books, where there's vampires and werewolves and ghosts and demons and all these things. But it's a world where that stuff just exists, and it's just normal. The idea that there's this thing, the BPRD, and they hunt down this stuff and solve mysteries, and like one of their biggest agents is like a literal giant bossy-ass demon guy. He's just accepted. Like, maybe not accepted by people as a human, but he's accepted as existing. So you just have these characters running through the world, and you film it as if it's normal, and you tell your stories from there. You don't over-sensationalize every element of it, because that's not really how the books feel. What makes the book so interesting is that these things are just accepted fact. You know what I mean? Like, they're kind of played that way. Because then you cut out all the middleman of the first two films where Hellboy has to keep himself a secret and hide away from people and all that shit. Like, who cares? And then in this movie, you can cut away all the other extra shit about, like, people constantly making weird bits about, like, oh, look, he looks like a demon, looks like a monster. Just cut all that stuff. Cut to the core of, that's who he is. Open it with, this is Hellboy, and then move from there. And I think you can make something really special. And it'd be a lot cheaper, because you wouldn't have to try to, like, over-stylize every element in the movie. Like, every single thing wouldn't have to be this big, you know, like, CGI fest. You could probably make the movie for, like, you know, between $40 and $60 million, and it would probably do a lot better. I mean, I really feel like if you need someone to make a successful Hellboy movie, you should just get, like, Blumhouse to get a director and a moderately competent writer to give it a shot, and, like, hamstring them financially, not creatively, so that they actually have to figure out how to adapt it in a unique way, rather than just figuring out how much bigger and more summer blockbuster they can make it. That's what I think. And also, maybe, you know, try to make it make some fucking sense, because the new Hellboy movie is just a mess in that regard. So yeah, that's Hellboy. If you haven't seen it yet, just don't watch it. You can rewatch the old ones. It's totally fine. If you guys really want to see how I think a Hellboy movie should really be done, you can go back and watch the two animated movies that were released between the first two films. There's Hellboy Sword of Storms and Hellboy Iron and Blood. And they're both animated. They're obviously more kid-friendly than the films or this newer movie, but they're really strong. The storytelling's good. The visuals are cool. The original GT cast is present, voicing the roles. It's pretty awesome, and I honestly think that if you're going to make a movie about Hellboy, you could just do that, but more mature and less kiddie, because the storytelling's clear, the themes make sense, the characters are vibrant, and it's pretty tight. That's Hellboy. You know, if you saw it and liked it, you know, let me know in the comments below. Tell me what you liked about it, why you think it's good. Maybe defend it. Maybe you saw something in it I didn't. I mean, admittedly, I fell asleep multiple times during the press screening I went to because I was just that bored. We also have a bonus video coming out this week on a subject that sort of popped up as a surprise. I kind of wanted to say a couple of things about it and didn't want to have to wait a whole other week to do it. So look out for that this week. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.